Coming to you from a basement in Colorado, these two childhood best friends try to expand their horizons by experiencing the best in art, music, movies, literature, and experiences. These cultural pearls might get trampled in the process, but at least the pigs are going to be happy. This is the Swine Before Pearls podcast with Joel and Trent.
Hey, it's Joel.
And it's also Trent. Good grief, that was so awkward.
I was just looking at you, trying to figure it out. This is Swine Before Pearls, where we look to open up our brain holes and experience new things by taking in the best media of everything and probably just trample over it in the process. Today, we're going to be reviewing one of the top-rated books of all time, called Catcher in the Rye, and I've been saying Catcher and the Rye.
You've been saying that's disgusting. That doesn't sound good. I don't like that.
I was like, what? I didn't even realize that until like probably 5 days ago or something. It just kind of clicked. I was like, oh, this is and the Rye, because Google kept correcting me. So I feel like an idiot.
Google's been coddling you.
Yeah, I feel like a big old baby boy. But
If Google was really trying to raise you into a responsible adult, it would have given you the wrong results.
you would have let me figure it out on my own. Nah, but this was a trip, doing a book and getting through this and kind of seeing how this whole experience was. And
yeah, I think going into this podcast, the books were the section that we both figured would probably be the hardest to kind of topple, because I don't think either of us are avid readers.
No.
But that was kind of also what I wanted, was to expose ourselves to reading and getting new experiences in that capacity as well.
Yeah, and I didn't even read this really. I did mostly audiobooks.
Yeah,
so I'm a big chump. I didn't even bother reading.
Well, that's okay. I think, there is something to be said for just focusing on the book all at once. But at the same time, I don't think there's any shame in reading audiobooks.
Yeah.
Except for when you do it.
Yeah.
It's pretty disgusting
it's pretty
and foul.
Shameful for me.
You've ruined this podcast, and I'm actually going to quit today.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right.
Door's
goodbye.
over there.
I'm kind of blocked off by the microphone.
Yeah. Well, you're here forever.
Oh, dang it.
This was an interesting experience to read this book. I've heard a lot about it in pop culture and media. Like, it's kind of an infamous book with like John Lennon. Are you aware of that?
You've told me about it, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
So the guy who killed John Lennon, the guy who killed John Lennon basically cited this book as he called John Lennon a phony. And this book was kind of like his inspiration to go do it. And that's what kind of also made this book even more edgy. It was banned for a really long time. It was like, they swear, they do all this stuff. And then it was like a very popular book to have in schools. It was part of school reading.
And I read it in school, actually.
You read it in school?
I've read this book before, so this was not my first pass at the book.
So tell me more about that experience for you.
Well, actually, I think I have to start with talking about my English teacher, because he dominated my thoughts on this book for a while. Do you remember the guy in Community, like the teacher who is just, what was that class
You're talking about Community, the TV show.
Yeah,
right?
Community, the TV show. There's the teacher who's just like super excited about his like trying new things class.
Oh, like seize the day.
Yeah, seize the day.
Carpe.
Yeah, so
cope and see them.
That guy was my English teacher, and he would get super excited about this book and try and tell us about it. And like none of us really connected. He kind of got me with like oh, if you don't apply yourself in school, like you can kind of relate to this character. Which I was like, sure, but I still don't really relate to this character. So he was just so excited. and I didn't understand. He had like Holden has such a cynical attitude,
Yeah.
and I am not Holden Caulfield in
You
any
are
way,
definitely
shape,
not.
or form.
You're definitely not.
Like I definitely am the sort of person to try and see the best in people, which is the exact opposite of Holden's cynical outlook. And I didn't connect with this book that well. I did think it was an easy read, which, as far as English class is concerned, is a blessing. So I remembered it as one of the better books that I read in my English class just for that fact. But other than that, I was relatively uninterested in this book. And I think it also stood in my mind as objective proof that there is no objective media analysis,
Yeah.
because you look at this book and it's a meandering nothing of a plot. The plot is basically non-existent and not really the point of the book.
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to like come at this from an objective perspective, like the writing's very good, there's a good tone, a good voice. At the same time, it's not much of a story in and of itself. And so
It's just kind of like random events sort of strung along loosely as
Yeah.
you're going along.
So for me, the idea I had in my head of this book was that it's a very personal experience
Mhm.
for everyone. And to try and objectively analyze it would basically show the futility of objective analysis.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you brought up just like how I think there's a lot of different reactions from people just kind of looking around on the internet and looking at other people's reviews and seeing kind of what general consensus is on the book. When I was in community college, I was in a film photography class, which you can imagine brings together some really interesting characters. And a lot of these kids, so I was in this group for a day. They called themselves the Breakfast Club. And it was like 4 community college students who all wore black and were just like super broody, edgy, cynical. And they all just sat outside and smoked cigarettes. And they called themselves the Breakfast Club. And they were like, "Hey, Joel, you want to join the Breakfast Club?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I came out with them for like 10 minutes. And I was like, this really sucks. But in that way, I think I could see a little bit of myself in Holden Caulfield, but more in the way that he kind of goes about his life and less about how he views it, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
the trying and failure of his life was kind of relatable to me, where he goes out and he's trying to make sense with his grips of what the world is from how he sees it. And it's like the further he goes in, the more insanity. It's written almost as like insanity, in my opinion. Just kind of this guy just stooping lower and lower and lower into his life until, he kind of hits certain rock bottoms. Which I thought was really interesting to read about.
Yeah. And I actually did relate to this book incredibly well.
Yeah.
Incredibly well, but only after I watched a video by John Green, he was in the Vlogbrothers. He wrote The Fault in Our Stars. And after watching that video, like it blew my mind, because I like the analogy that I came up with was it was like I was trying to like make sense of a painting and it was like covered in dust.
Yeah.
Right. And like watching this John Green video where he unpacks this book, like the dust got cleared off and I realized it was just a mirror. And I saw so much of myself in Holden Caulfield. I'm not nearly as cynical, but if things had taken a different turn in my life, even just recently, I would have ended up in a very similar spot to Holden Caulfield. And I had some of those same experiences, because what John Green really nailed home is that Holden is in a crisis.
Yeah.
And he just needs somebody to listen to him.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, I've actually been there. And now I understand everything he's going through. And like you see all these situations. Holden's just desperately trying to ask people questions, trying to get a grasp of life. And everyone has such limited empathy. Like that's just a matter of fact of life, and it's not a moral like issue. It's just the fact that like humans have such a limited capacity for empathy because you can't take on the burdens of everyone else that is around you.
Yeah.
And so Holden reaches out to these people that he's known, and he has a bunch of these shallow connections, and no one's willing to put up with him. No one's willing to be patient with him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so desperate. And I've been there, and I was in a crisis, and the people who stopped and listened to me were so important to me. And the people who stopped me and invalidated how I felt and wouldn't hear me out before imparting their worldview on me.
Yeah.
They really damaged my relationship with them.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a great point of just, he is in crisis. Like this is following a crisis. And you can see as the story kind of goes on in its way, the more he's invalidated, the more loose answers he's getting that aren't answering his questions, and he doesn't feel like he's being listened to, the more jaded he becomes as he goes down to the point where, he's talking to the, I forgot his name, the guy who's like rich and popular that he knew, and he was asking him about women, and then he's just like super drunk, right, when he's asking those questions, and then he's passed off as, well, you're immature, and it's like he was just getting more and more jaded and started like filling himself with more and more like padding and distractions as he was going down, to the point that the interaction that he has with his teacher, where he's asking him questions, till then you can just see how much more jaded he's become and how much more, things in his life that he's kind of put him between him and reality. And I don't know, I feel bad for the guy. Like I feel like I just wanted to be his friend in the book the entire time. I think I just wanted to like sit down with him and talk with him, and just seeing, I think like it kind of broke my heart the more the book went on. And the character developed. It was just a really real experience. And it's crazy to see that this was written in it was published in the 1950s. And I can see why this was a pretty revolutionary book for American culture, because, that period of time was supposed to be about prosperity. You just got after World War II. So people weren't, and when this is taking place, it's in like the late 40s, right? So it makes sense for the characters to be disassociating with him, because no one really talked about mental health, or, it's like, you live in a thriving economic country. You live in the greatest country in the world. America's going through this boom. You go to a great school, you've got rich parents. Like, how can you be miserable? And that's kind of the sense I get behind every character, is they're just annoyed with him because you shouldn't be dealing with this. We live in such a great era of time. And I just think it's crazy that this came out in that era, because this wasn't really a topic that was being talked about in American culture at the time. And I think Holden, outside of the book, really represents this new kind of counterculture movement in American youth, to kind of, even at the end, he's like, I'm going to go hitchhike. I'm going to go live in Colorado. He's just like, he hates society, his jadedness, he hates himself in a way, but he also just like hates society, even though objectively that was a very prosperous time. And I think that's so interesting. So,
and I think in addition to that, the reason why this book is able to address those mental health issues so well is you look at J.D. Salinger,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the speculation is that this book was fairly autobiographical,
Yeah.
and he did fight in World War II, so he had a little bit of a different adolescence than Holden did.
Yeah.
But it was that same jaded cynicism and those same mental health issues that made the book so real, is because there's probably a lot of reality to the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and it very likely could be J.D. Salinger's actual experience to a certain extent.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I think it's a little bit of both. I think in a way it is autobiographical and it's also kind of disconnected. But I have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Like, do you think you would be friends with Holden Caulfield? In like not like in a I want to help him way, but if this dude was in your circle of people that you knew, would you like take time and be friends with him?
Funny story, I actually was friends with Holden Caulfield. Now, I state that kind of as a joke, but there's literally a guy, and I've been meaning to talk about this in the episode at some point. But there's literally a guy that like I interacted with, and I felt like he was Holden Caulfield. A little bit of a less socially aware Holden Caulfield.
Yeah.
Which isn't saying much because Holden Caulfield is not the most socially aware
Just
individual.
a little inept.
Yeah. But he literally in every way reminded me of Holden Caulfield.
Yeah.
He was passionate about writing. He had a brother who died, and that was a defining moment in his life.
Yeah.
And he was just so jaded and cynical about everyone. He would tell me, I've learned that you can't trust anyone.
Yeah.
The only person you can trust is yourself, because everyone else will let you down. And to a certain extent, that's almost like he was in an even worse spot than Holden Caulfield.
Yeah.
But every time I thought of him, like he kind of brought me back to Catcher in the Rye. And it felt like the book coming to life, just interacting with this guy. And he was such a mess, and he was very difficult to talk to. And he would railroad conversations to kind of like process through his own experiences. Like we would be like joking around, and he would bring up something uncomfortable that he's working through, and we're like, that's not really the conversation we were having,
why
buddy.
are we doing this?
And he was a really tough guy to interact with, but I'm also the sort of person who tries to make the best of every situation I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going through kind of a rough time myself, not a serious rough time, but just having kind of like this existential crisis of like being unhappy with the situation I was in, and kind of at the fault of him too, where it was like, I'm really enjoying this community, but this guy is just such a drain on me. But he grew me as a person because I really stepped out of my comfort zone and tried to be friends with him. And it made a difference. He told me like that year that we spent together was one of the best years of his life, even though he was such a mess all the way in between. And I tried my best to be a friend to him.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's Holden Caulfield is Sigma male grindstone. But he's such this character. He's such a character, but then but I don't usually look at books or characters and think, man, do I know somebody like that? And for some reason, every time I was reading this book or listening to it, I kept thinking, do I know a Holden Caulfield? And, I think everybody does in some respect. There's always people in our life that are going through this loss of innocence in a way, in so many aspects. And we can kind of like watch on the sidelines, but as you were saying, like, people, he just needed somebody to listen to him and validate his feelings. That's what you were kind of mentioning. And it made me just think, is there people in my life like that that I need to be listening to better and be validating their feelings better, instead of just like brushing them off? Because I think all of us are in a place where we could be in crisis at any point. I don't know. It's just a really interesting part to the book that I wasn't expecting to find to turn it so introspectively.
Yeah. And I think the book has really engendered in me a sort of passion where I look at the world, and what Holden really needed was attention. And we shame people who desire attention. And that's kind of weird to me when I really think about it, because Holden's going about his desire for attention in ways that are wrong, absolutely wrong, and
What, buying
unhelpful.
girls beer and cigarettes and hoping they're gonna dance with him?
No, that's actually morally commendable.
That's super healthy.
Yeah, I'm not talking about in a moral way, just in a like wrong way of going about it in
Yeah.
terms of success.
Yeah.
But the need for attention is something that we all have inside of us, and we shame people for trying to seek it out when really we should like take them aside and try and use that energy in better ways. Absolutely encourage people to get that attention in better ways, but first let's actually give them the attention they need. We like, attention whore is a phrase that gets thrown around.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not prostituting yourself for attention. That's an actual need. We need to have community, and we need to feel like we belong, and we need to feel like other people value us and are actually interested in what we contribute. And it's hard to get that.
Yeah.
And if we don't value the people who might go about getting attention in the wrong way, that's only going to snowball the problem.
Yeah, it snowballs the problem. Like, the deeper he gets rejected by people, the deeper he gets into his own head and has like these inner monologues. And I think it was so interesting calling everybody phonies. Just that whole concept.
And he's not a very genuine person himself.
No, it's like the pot calling the kettle black, but you know, he's having trouble interacting with people, so he's like retreating into his head and looking at people who have happiness or have something that he wants and can't get. It's a little sociopathic if you think about it. Like, he's got some really bad stuff brewing in him that he's just like sitting silently and judging people. And you know, I know that feeling because there's been times where I've almost feel like I've lost my mind. And something that was the worst for me was, and I think social media has totally just exasperated this, but like, you're having issues, no one's reaching out to you, and you kind of retreat into your own head. And then you start looking on the sidelines and looking at people with, oh, we just got married, or, oh, we bought a dog, we bought a house. And you look at that and then you say, man, what a bunch of phonies, what a bunch of morons. And then you justify your way of living and say, well, at least I'm being true and authentic. But really that starts to just turn into pain. It turns into just a real place of pain. And it gets harder to dig yourself out of that. And you can just see that every step of the way with Holden, that he's just digging himself deeper into pain. And it's not getting better. You know, the madness increases. And it was just interesting for me to feeling, you know, not in the same like edgy way, but feeling those same thoughts at points of just looking at people and saying, you're so fake, you're so real. Like, just be authentic, be true, say who you are, say what you mean. But in reality, you're just the pot calling the kettle black. Like, you're just so hypocritical, you know, just really turns the mirror on you.
And that's kind of a natural mindset, I think, when you're in pain, is you need help. And if you don't know where to get it, then you start looking at the people around you and start saying, like, wait a minute, I need help and they're not providing help. There's an issue here. And everyone that Holden interacts with pretty much is incredibly self-involved.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Holden is not entitled to get help from them specifically.
Mhm.
Like he's he's trying to get help from a prostitute. He's trying to get help from a cab driver. All of these people like are just in their own world. And you can look at that and say like, oh, they're just phonies. Like they're not doing anything important in their lives. But the reality is that they're living their own lives. They can't just drop everything for a random client.
Why
and
should
make
they
them
be
their work.
responsible for his answering his questions in a way?
Yeah. And it's Holden has this kind of savior complex. And you see it throughout the book where like he wants to protect innocence and like
Yeah, I'm gonna save all these kids. And
yeah, the title of the book is Catcher in the Rye, and it refers to Holden's desire to stand at the edge of a cliff basically and protect kids from falling off. He says that's what I want to do with my life.
yeah,
And he also sees like the swear words written on the walls and he wants to rub them off. And in that way, he sees himself as like kind of a savior. And he always pictures himself in like action movie situations being the hero.
yeah,
But the reality is that he's not a hero. He's just self-involved like everyone else
Mhm.
and a massive loser, unfortunately, just like everybody else.
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I think an allegory for this book. Have you ever seen The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
Yes.
I think that's like the happier side of this book in a way. In that sense of this guy is just living in his own head, living in a fantasy world. He views himself as this amazing person when in reality he's just like really done nothing too significant with his life. And I thought it was interesting too how Holden keeps coming up with these grand plans of escape. Like this is going like a change of scenery is going to solve my problem. Like, oh, run away with me and I'm going to work at a gas station and we're
Yeah.
going to live in a cabin in the woods, or I'm going to move to Colorado. He has these fantasies that he sees himself in where if I just date this person that I really actually like, and if I move to this place, get this job, he keeps changing his station, but in reality everything that is bad about him is inside him, and no amount of change in that like location whatever is going to fix that until he addresses the darkness inside him. And I think I spent a large time in the book thinking, what is the solution? What is the solution for this? Like, how can he raise his standing? How can he see himself better? Like, what is going to save him from this road he's going down? I think that was like a big question that I had.
Yeah. And I think the book does kind of answer that. And not entirely.
Yeah.
I don't think even by the time Holden is like in the future writing this story about his past self, he's entirely like healed and better.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the ending was something that I understood very well.
Mm.
And like the most emotion I felt while actually reading the book was when he decides, I'm going to run away and I'm going to let Phoebe come say goodbye. So he leaves a note for Phoebe, and Phoebe is his sister in case anyone listening hasn't actually read the book. But Phoebe comes during her lunch break as she was supposed to meet Holden. But instead of just like saying goodbye, she has a bag packed and she's ready to go with him.
Mm.
And it like almost made me cry because I'm going through this crisis with Holden watching as he falls apart. And there's finally somebody who loves him.
Yeah.
And Phoebe isn't the perfect person that Holden needs all the time. She's still shaming him for failing out of his school.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she thinks the world of him. And I have a hard time imagining like being in such a messy place and then coming out of that and someone loves me that much.
Yeah.
Where I have this stupid plan to run away and they're all on board for it because they love me so much. And like I felt vicariously loved through Holden because I'd been on this journey with him. And that's family. That's true love.
Yeah.
And it turns into a mess and he realizes like, wait, this is stupid. I can't take her with me. And she kind of blows up about it because she's kind of subject to the same whims as Holden.
Yeah.
But then there's this awkwardness. They're going to the zoo together and everything's super tense because she's all upset and hurt that he doesn't want to take her with him, even though she loves him so much.
Yeah.
But they get to the carousel and I've seen like symbolic analysis of this and I don't know if I like vibe with it completely. Just like it's like as it spins around, he sees like the return and like the going in and out of innocence. I don't understand what that's symbolic.
That sounds like a little bit too deep.
But what I did, like, sometimes in life, something just connects with you, where you're just watching something happen, and the book ends with him feeling super relieved.
Yeah,
and nothing really happened except that like Phoebe just came along with him, and he feels a little bit better because she's coming along. But at the end of the day, it was just something random that triggered in him. I was like, hey, maybe things aren't really that bad.
Yeah.
And that's just how things are when you're in like such a mess.
Seriously.
There's just that random moment where something pretty disjointed from your reality just clicks with you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, hey, yeah, things are tough, but also like things are good.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was, I've had some rough time these last few months, but I've been finding joy in just the most random stuff, like when I put a bathrobe on in the morning and it's really cold and it's like, oh man, that's really nice. Or, there's just like this little, like, I think we expect salvation in our lives as this big grandiose moment, like Lord of the Rings, the sky opens up and the horses are running down the hill and it's this beautiful sight of, oh, everything's going to be okay. Everything's all right. We rarely tend to get those in our everyday life, but I think you point out something really great where Phoebe, I don't even think he was fully set on carrying out his plan, but he was just getting to the edge enough to see who's going to join him. And it was like the attempt of Phoebe was all that matters. He didn't need her to go with him all the way. He just wanted to, it was just like the attempt that hit him. And it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't until later that it kind of lights up, it's domino blocks falling over that's kind of just leading him to this place of a little bit of self-acceptance and getting him out of that dark place that he's been stewing in 24/7 and constantly digging himself in deeper and deeper. So I don't know about you, but I kind of left the book a little bit hopeful.
Yeah.
I think some people were like, man, I read Catcher in the Rye. It was depressing as heck. This is awful. Like, what a depressing book. But I kind of left it being on this journey and then feeling hopeful, not given a, fully clear ending. Like, and Holden had 5 kids and a nice cottage on the hill, and he's now a dentist, and everything worked out. We didn't get that, but it was this like, just kind of like feeling of hopefulness in the end.
Yeah. And this is just like a 2-day journey, right? So it's just a little snapshot of his life. And there are definitely some interesting events within, but overall, not much happens. And yet it's such an emotional journey for him. And that's the reality of life, is that we kind of just keep moving, and things get crazy, but life is these connections of downward trajectory and then being lifted up in a way that we might not even expect.
Yeah.
And the solution that we might have come up with ourselves might move us in the right direction, even though it's not the thing that got us to the better spot.
Yeah. And it goes in seasons too. Like, I think cynicism is just ideal, like crushed idealism.
And Holden is a very idealistic guy. He has a lot of views on how the world should work and how he should behave. And he's constantly critical of other people's behavior, his own behavior, and just the overall worldview that he has is very idealistic, even though a lot of the ways he lives aren't even idealistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And as that idealism is snuffed out, it turns into cynicism, and it brings him low, and it brings him to this place. But life goes into seasons too, and I think we got to watch this season of a young man who just really was struggling to find himself and find his place, and just sink to his lowest bottoms in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
That's what I thought was interesting too, is like, this is happening in such a short period of time. And like, we start off and it's just this kid, and he's like at school, and it's like, and now he's, yeah, sure, I'll take a prostitute random dude in a elevator. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think that was the other thing I realized too, is he was so out of his depth when he was like out in the world. He had like a little bit of control when he was at school, in kind of, putting down his friends, calling them names that they didn't want to be called. Like, he had some superiority, and he thought, oh, I can take this out and sort of live my power fantasies out in the real world. And then the real world just kind of stomps on his neck so hard. And just, when I think the scene with the prostitute, where he just, he has no idea what he's doing. He doesn't know how he's going to pay this. He doesn't want, he liked the idea. He didn't want to be there. And they're just like pounding him, and it's like, he has no idea what's going on. And I think when you live in a fantasy, when you're constantly living in a world of fantasy where you're the hero, man, life is such a hard reality check when you get out of that and start facing real things.
Absolutely. Although I would argue that although the events of the book take place over a short range of time, that this is just really the climax of the story.
Yeah.
And that everything that builds up to it is the stuff we miss. Yeah. I mean, obviously he tells us about his brother dying. And like I talked about with the guy whose brother died, that's a life-defining event.
Yeah.
Especially if you're close to them and you think the world of them, like that'll shatter your world.
Yeah.
But I think something very subtle that I don't even know if this is necessarily intended by the book. But I look at Holden's life and I see parents that are trying to project this image of a perfect family. And Holden doesn't fit into that mold.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to bet that there's a lifetime of pain that goes before that.
Leading up to that.
Yeah. And he just can't fit into that standard. And he's struggling in school because he can't be the person that he's expected to be.
Yeah.
He can't handle the weight of the pressures. And that's a lifelong event that's building up. And so him going out into the world is the climax of all that building up that was just subtly alluded to.
Yeah. It's kind of like the story of the prodigal son in a way. You know, we don't get to see a ton of the events that lead to the younger son leaving and going out to his own. But, you know, there's these inner family dynamics that you never see, but you get to watch the story at the final chapter. And another thing I was thinking about is, you know, I think the time and place that this is taking place and just plays a big part. Cause like if Holden was growing up in our like modern time, I think he would have some of the same
Attitudes.
attitudes and issues. But I think it's so easy to find communities and things now that can almost echo your point of view or echo what you're thinking. Like with the internet, it's like, oh, I'm really into dressing up like a dog. And and then all of a sudden you can get on the internet and find 50 people that also want to dress up like a dog and do that.
Yeah.
And I think with some of his interests, some of, you know, writing, I think if he had that exposure to meet more people, it'd be a little bit of a different story in some ways because he could reach out to more people. But the fact that this is taking place in this like very early America, you know, modern America, no one knows what to do with him. And it's like, this kid's nuts. Just be happy, dude. Everyone's happy. Be happy. Everyone's doing their own life. And I don't know. I just keep looking back and forth at things like that.
See, I almost wonder if like there's two ways that could go, because I think Holden could also find community in some pretty negative ways.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, and that goes too. Like he could hop on 4chan and be an incel. Like
there you go.
I mean, honestly,
I can see that.
I
mean,
could see that too, though.
Yeah, isn't like kind of the criticism of this book that it like kind of perpetuates like that sort of incel culture.
That's a little bit of how I felt when I read some of it, you know, and
Yeah.
I think I would agree with that, of this like the loner hero that's just completely misunderstood by society. Except unlike, you know, I think Joker, Taxi Driver, those are always shown as in the same vein. But I think in those movies, they get some sort of like revenge against people that did them wrong, or they become victors in some way, or take something. And I think in the end, he just is just like, in the end of his quest, a lot of him is just destroyed. And then he kind of finds happiness in this very simple thing, you know, not this big power fantasy being fulfilled. He finds his sister just wanting to go with him and run away to be the spark that starts to set off some more hopeful future. So I think, yeah, if he was in modern times, this could, and that's why it's interesting that I can see the parallels of how this book inspired, you know, the murder of John Lennon, and I think Lee Harvey Oswald cited this book as well for the assassination of JFK. I believe.
Yeah. Well, the entire premise of just this lonely, bitter person attracts lonely, bitter people, and lonely, bitter people are probably more prone to violence, or maybe people who are prone to violence are probably lonely and bitter would probably be a better way of saying that. So you have all these people who are citing this book as like their inspiration, which I don't think was the takeaway you're supposed to take. I think that's not necessarily a hot take.
Yeah.
But I think the reality that people like kind of miss when they like point the finger at this book is that being lonely and sad is just part of life.
Mm.
And it's more of a reality for some people than others.
Yeah.
But when somebody who's really lonely and sad looks at this and says, this guy's my inspiration, I'm going to go do something awful, you have to stop for a second and say, like, that's not the book's fault. The book is not encouraging violence. The book is telling a story of a lonely and messed up person.
Yeah, it's just a piece of it's a piece of work. It's a piece of literature. You know, everything is interpreted by people. How it, you know, if I read Friendship is Magic, My Little Pony, and decided to, you know, go do something horrible in its name, that shouldn't tarnish the source material of that, you know. I have a question for you though.
Yeah, go for it.
So with all that you're saying, so you've basically said, I don't want to like mince your words or anything, but you've kind of said that if certain people read this book, it could be a little detrimental to them, taken the wrong way. Do you think, I mean, this book was in school when you were there. Do you think this is a good book for kids in school? Because this is like some pretty serious, deep, emotional subject matter. And I think it's important to tap into that at a young age. But I think we're looking at it with a little bit more maturity, you know, and a little more conceptual understanding of it. But do you think that this is something that should just be kind of handed out as literature to be read by, you know, when you're your age, when you first read it?
I think that it's probably a healthy thing overall. I don't think that this book encourages violence in any way.
Yeah.
If you compare this book to like 13 Reasons Why, right?
Yeah.
I watched 13 Reasons Why, and the later seasons are like unwatchable garbage. The first season,
This is the show that like deals with like the subject of like suicide or something. I haven't seen
in
it.
in a very irresponsible way.
Okay.
It basically glorifies depression and suicide.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I watched it, and I was in a good enough place where I can say, like, this premise, like, there's a lot to it. Like, it's a very intelligent way to tell a story, even though the content of the story is very irresponsible. And you watch 13 Reasons Why, and I said to myself, if I was in a bad headspace, it would be bad for me to watch this. Because the messages that it portrays are just like so irresponsible.
Yeah.
And just so messed up.
Yeah.
I think the contrast is with this book, there's catharsis in seeing someone that's going through all this pain. And they're going through all these awful experiences, and they have a pretty bad mindset.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's not encouraging any like real evil.
It's not encouraging evil, and it's not encouraging you to adopt the same mindset. It's almost like a cautionary tale in some ways.
Yeah. And that's the direct reading of the book. It's not subtle that like people read this book and they're like, I don't like Holden Caulfield. You're not supposed to like him just as like a dude that is like the example I've heard is like, he's not the character that men want to be and women want to be with. That's not Holden Caulfield. You look at Holden Caulfield and you say, he's a mess. I don't want to be like this guy. That's the straightforward reading. And you see yourself in him because you're a mess and you don't want to be like you.
Yeah.
But if you have any level of emotional intelligence, and if you have a good teacher who is able to wrap these ideas up for you.
And a teacher who doesn't watch you while you sleep.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's oh boy.
Well, go ahead. Finish your thought there. I'm sorry.
you
Ah,
were-
shoot. Let's sing it.
I was making some good points.
No,
and
I
you
hear
just-
what you're saying though. Like you
Yeah.
need someone to kind of guide you through this stuff, you know. You need someone in your life to guide you, and I think it's a big reason why, for at least for boys, young boys, like father figures, whether it's your dad or, you know, something like that, like having a guiding hand to navigate some of this really tricky stuff is so vital, in
Yeah.
your life. And I think that's another big thing that I saw in this book was he kind of had father figures in these teachers, and they let him down like
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
ginormous ways, like crush, you know, his father's never around in the book. He's going to these older male teachers to ask him questions about life. He's going to these older male friends to ask him how he can get with women. You know, he just doesn't have a father figure either.
And you point out that authority figure. I think when I talk about my own crisis, when I think back to just earlier this year and the struggles that I was having, the person who was able to finally reach out to me and make me feel heard, she told me, I am unequivocally in your favor.
Hmm.
And like that was exactly what I needed to hear.
Mhm.
And later on, as like she had built some rapport with me, and like I sought advice from her, she was able to like kind of set my head straight a little more and say like, hey, maybe this is a bad idea. But
Mm.
the first thing she did was tell me, I am unequivocally in
Yeah.
your favor. And I think that's what Holden needed. Somebody to just say, hey, I'm on your side.
He needed a therapist.
He needed a therapist.
He needed a therapist. No, but you're right. Like he needed somebody to not just judge him for what he was feeling or brush him off or give him a wrong answer or take advantage of him. He needed somebody to just start and say, hey, I'm in your favor. You know, your life is kind of a mess right now. Let's work through it. Let's see where this goes. And, you know, he didn't he didn't find that and the people that he was looking for. Certainly not the taxi cab driver.
Or like I think of Sally, like Holden was being pretty irrational and he's like, hey, let's just move out and we'll start this life together and we'll be poor together, but we'll be happy.
How many times have I said that? to
Yeah,
people?
I bet. Yeah, but
oh my gosh, I'm Holden.
if sometimes I wonder, but if Sally would have handled that a little differently, where she didn't invalidate his feelings, and I think if she would have just stopped and said like, hey, like I want to support you and I want to help you out, like let's slow things down a little bit.
Yeah.
But like I'm here for you, I want to help you. I think that would have had a very different effect on him than just like shutting him down, and then all of a sudden he's like, well, okay, then you're just a royal pain in the ass.
Well, you're a phony and a royal
Yeah.
pain in the ass. Yeah.
And now they're both hurt
Yeah.
because she didn't know how to deal with his pain,
Yeah.
which is fair. He's got a lot to work through.
I think it's also like pretty important to look at how people are just shutting him down and no one, in life, I think we have friends that don't demand anything from you to be your friend, to love, support you. But as you have those people in your life, like good friends, like you and me, you don't ask anything from me. Like you don't usually ask anything from me. But there's this underlying tone that is, I want to live a good life because you're my friend and you love me, and you
Yeah.
care about me. And that inspires me to do a good job living my life and making good decisions, because it's not a fear of being